Well, thank you, Kate, for hosting and facilitating this discussion, and thanks to UNIT as well for having the vision to support this after I told them about my book that I'd written, and I was looking for ways to be able to talk about it in genuine and authentic ways that might be meaningful. So I'm really lucky to have Helen Beard and Liber-Lewis here this evening, who are both UNIT artists who are represented by the gallery. And this is an unscripted talk where we're going to talk about some of the ways in which the issues that I covered in my book intersect with Helen and Anna's art practice, and some of the ways in which what I've written about finds some resonance with what they're doing as women artists, which is in many ways a political position to occupy. I think we all know that there is a gross underrepresentation of women, not only in commercial galleries, but grossly unrepresented in our museums and our art spaces. And so this in itself is something which is really meaningful for all of us as a writer and with two artists to talk about. So I just want to say a little bit about how my book emerged. And I wanted to bring the 50 years of art history that I had very thankfully absorbed where I studied at UCL, and I was very lucky to come into contact with great feminist art historians such as Tamar Garb, Griselda Pollock, who I'm sure needs no introduction, who until recently was chair of the History of Art and Visual Culture at Leeds, who didn't teach me directly, but she was in that milieu. And I felt that when I started thinking about writing this, which was around 2018, 2019, and it was the anniversary of the Representation of the People Act, where some women were given the vote, I noticed that there were also some exhibitions happening at the time in Tate Modern, which were Picasso and Modigliani, and it felt like feminist art history, in the way the work of these modern masters was being presented, and celebration of the female, this sort of unfiltered testosterone charged celebration of female bodies was just really tacitly accepted and not being challenged or not being critically examined. And as I write about in the introduction to my book, I also was mansplained really badly in the National Gallery in front of a work that was about, unmitigated male violence against women. It's the story of Griselda. It's one of their early Renaissance paintings. And so I felt that this great lineage of feminist art history was not filtering down to a mainstream audience. And so I wanted to write something that would communicate these ideas in a simple way, in a direct way, that also touched on real experiences that people might have, whether that's in the gallery or not. So to kind of de-rarify and demystify feminist art history, take it out of the university, take it out of the academy, and out of those spaces where it continues to be quite contentious. So that's a little overview of what brought me to write the book. And the book itself is 4 archetypes that I deconstruct: Venus, mothers, maidens, and monsters. And I know, seeing as Halloween is upon us, we do want to talk about witches and monsters at some point in this discussion. And I also wanted to talk about how women artists resisted misogyny and resisted this very patriarchal projection of art history that has become the canonical norm. And the last thing that was really important to me was, I think I've mentioned it, a sense of authenticity. I really wanted to write something, make art history have a deeper personal impact than being something that was elitist, and to make those debates that we've had within feminism resonate through our visual culture and art images, through a discussion of them on a more personal level, for want of a better word. So this might be an opening then to pass over to Helen and Anna. And I was thrilled that before I'd met them, before we'd started talking about this talk, that they had read the book and it had been meaningful to them. And I think that's something that the three of us have shared as this way of being surprised as women when someone really cares about your work.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to hand over to you two to maybe respond to how you felt some of the themes touched on you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very pleased to be here, and reading your book affected me quite deeply. I'm glad I read it about a month before coming here, because it filled me with rage, and I had to kind of work through that. And I think possibly because of the age that I'm at, I'm starting to reflect about certain things that have happened to me as a woman. And actually, it was just so nice to hear your voice in the book. And I identified with every single archetype. And it was interesting for me to kind of think that I was less drawn to the role of motherhood, even though I am a mother, I guess because my son is 17 and will be leaving home soonish. And just kind of reflecting on certain things that have happened to me in my life. And I think the question that I continually ask myself is, who am I and what do I want? And I often ask myself as well, who gets the right to paint what? And I think I've got kind of a binary reaction to this, because I've been really inspired by misogyny in my past. I think I had a lot of anger as a very young child, and probably used drawing to kind of contain that anger. And I was very shy and very quiet, and I used to kind of just use that as possibly as a way to manage it. But when I became a teenager, I discovered Bret Easton Ellis and was all in. And I think, I've been very inspired by very misogynist. I would actually argue that he's not a misogynist, but the violence that he writes about with women, I was kind of inspired by. I was inspired by the fact that he talks about numbness being a feeling. I was very into John Updike and reading about kind of the man stuck in suburbia. And I think, I've realised now that I'm 44, that actually it's very difficult to contain what being a woman is. And I was just thrilled to read the book, and I've taken it to my therapist.
One of Anna's great quotes before I let Helen speak is that you were inspired by the hard edge of misogyny, I think, which is something you said in one of our earlier conversations, and I just wanted to highlight that as something that I think is really excellent to reflect on, this idea of taking misogyny and using it, turning it against itself, and turning it in on itself as something to draw on, as a response to how women have been, kind of pigeonholed, and especially in the sorts of art we've been used to seeing traditionally, how women's bodies have been exploited and sort of consumed for the male artist's gaze. I think it's wonderful to have a woman artist who exploits and uses patriarchy for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Helen. I think absolutely. I'm very rebellious. I went to the Royal College, and after I kind of found a stretcher that they were chucking away that was really big, I kind of claimed it for myself. I realised that if I was going to navigate this very male world, that I did have to adopt some of the language. But I think it's taken me a really long time to kind of harness that. For a while, I was, I guess, painting the female gaze, and I had a male muse, and that turned into me painting lots of very large cocks. My poor son used to go for play dates, and they'd ask him what his mother painted, and he'd go, "They're abstract." But yeah, I don't paint cocks anymore, but I think I do have that, that sensibility in my work. Although when I did start painting, initially I wanted to kind of have that calm, clear space of Agnes Martin, where I could kind of paint with my back to the world and, feel at one with nature. But I realised I had so much anger in me that I had to paint through. I think I'm getting closer to harnessing a language, like you say, of hard edge abstraction and, kind of welcoming the kind of difficult traumatic history line that I come from, and looking at Russian constructivism. But yeah, I think that's the only way to win with the patriarchy. You kind of got to butt up against them.
And we can think about some of those themes a bit specifically. We're going to look at some of Anna and Helen's work, a couple of images in a moment, and sort of think about some of those themes that Anna's been talking about.
Okay, hi. The book also resonated with me in a big way, but I think that I'm not a rebel, or I wasn't a rebel at all when I was younger. I'm a working class girl from Birmingham. I, didn't think that I'd go to university. I didn't think that I'd spend a life making art. It was something that, I wasn't expecting, and I actually think that it's only in the latter stage, so if you're looking at your book, in the final chapter, The Monstrous Women, that I actually am feeling that empowerment and independence and learning how to paint and feel like I've got something to say to younger women. But also I have a young daughter as well, so lots of the chapters of your book really resonated, and so it was just so enjoyable to hear all of the different historical myths and legends and about all of the paintings that we could really relate to.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that we've talked about between the three of us is this idea of entering into one's fifth decade and being in 40s and sort of navigating that as a moment of coming into our power, into our sort of intellectual and artistic and creative maturity, but also the sort of the edge of that being that we face invisibility as the way that women are seen when they're younger. And I think that's something that is particularly sort of active and problematic. And I just wondered how you both, any reflection on that as the...
What shocked me is my, or most women's actually, lack of awareness of how the patriarchy really affects, very small things. You just don't... I grew up in Thatcher's era, and I watched her being a man, acting as a man, and I thought, this is an awful way to present yourself, because it lacks the thing that is so important about you, that you're female and that you could really be championing women. And so I think it's really hard to take on board that we're all so wrapped up in this patriarchy, we don't even see it. It's really there should be a backlash, really, and I think it's so systemic that we don't even know it's there.
Did you find, as an art student, that it was very sort of prescient and very pressing? I know both of you studied in different places. I know, Anna, at the RCA, you've had particular experiences and circumstances that have been aggressions against you as a woman artist who identifies with sort of female politics. It might be a good idea to have some images up, if we can, Katerina, get some of the, so we can start to think a little bit about Anna and Helen's work in this regard. But, what have you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo kind of what Helen said, really, about, the patriarchy being so present, and performative, successful women having to adopt a male demeanour. And I think, like you, actually, I wasn't rebellious initially. I think I've kind of it was a survival mechanism. And wow, what is going on?
Yeah, I don't think it's about my book.
So, but also I think I'll talk about the RCA. I mean, I think going back to study at the RCA in my 30s with a young, I guess my child was about 8 at the time, I was just so happy to be there because I was given a full scholarship, and I'd been parenting and in kind of the wilderness for so long that it was just like such a relief to be able to creatively express myself. But it made me laugh so much that it nothing had changed. You know, like the teachers, and I'm sorry to say this if anyone's wearing it, were wearing, you know, double denim. It was exactly like the 90s, and they were sleeping with the female students.
Sleeping with students, right? Yeah.
But for me, yeah, but for me, it was just funny because I was picking up my kid at the school gates and dealing with the politics of what that's about, and then going to art college and dealing with, you know, a lot of younger people who are at a particular moment in their life. So I don't think I've ever felt like I've fitted in anywhere ever. And I think even, you know, being a mother, I struggled kind of trying to figure out how to navigate that. You know, how, oh, you're meant to go to NCT. Oh, I don't fit in with any of these women. Their husbands are playing golf. You know, I don't get it, you know, and I was a single mother from the outset. So I think, you know, playing any kind of gender is kind of nonsense. And I was kind of interested, you know, when the whole trans thing comes out, and I think it's very difficult to talk about, but I was like, am I trans? You know, I don't think so, you know, I'm not, but it's just, I find pigeonhole any kind of label just to be so unproductive. So I don't know if that's...
Well, no, let's talk about that issue of the mother as creative and the mother as the politics of mothering, really, because that's something that was very urgent for me in my book, having children who are a little bit younger and having a 2-year-old when I wrote this book in this sort of torrent over lockdown by having to lock myself into rooms in order to have access to space to write. And you know, the politics of mothering and creativity since Virginia Woolf have been very fraught and have been unresolved, and we haven't managed to find a social response that's accommodated women's ability to do both. Okay, so we have these very confined roles of what is an artist, and that derives from what a male artist always was, this lone singular genius who perpetuates these myths of greatness, and that doesn't sort of match up very neatly to picking up children from school at 3 o'clock or changing nappies and breastfeeding. And I thought that maybe that was something interesting. I know, Helen, you had some thoughts on that, didn't you?
Yeah.
On how you navigated that.
It is a frustrating thing to do. You know, the school timetable and the fact that you have to down tools, and, you know, particularly if you're an oil painter, you can't just walk out and leave it till the next day because it's, you know, not going to, it's going to dry and it's going to not be good. So it is a very frustrating thing, and actually, you know, now that I'm through it, I really understand how difficult a thing it was to deal with, and I'm wondering if in this next stage I'm just going to feel so much freer, and that's what you know, I've always painted, I've always been unapologetic about painting female desire. That was hard, again, like you said, when your kids are little, you know, and the pictures are on the wall, you know, full frontal sex.
Can we move on to show one of Helen's, just for those with her, okay, for those who might not be familiar with her work. Yeah. So how was that? How did you? Because there is this myth that mothers don't have sex, isn't there? There's this myth that the mother has to be this virgin that derives from the Madonna and Child, and this idea that mothers don't have a sexual appetite, or they don't have a sexual identity. So when you're painting that, and you're painting about sexual identity so explicitly...
Initially, when they were very little, I just hid it away. I had a studio in the garden, then I got a studio outside of the house that I went to, and I didn't invite them there very much. And then, but as they got older and they started to understand about sex, they actually really loved coming to the studio, and they loved talking about it with their friends. Were really excited about talking to them about it, and they took it so well. They really embraced it, and I don't think they were embarrassed by their mother. I think we were always quite open as a family about sex, so I think it was, you know, talked about in the family, and I just don't think it was a problem for them. In the end, what I thought would be difficult for them was absolutely fine. But I think for me, it actually is hard to paint, to put myself out there and paint female desire in such an explicit way. And I think it does take a lot of, I don't know if it's confidence, but a lot of a need to do it, because I think it's empowering for women, and I want to be able to allow women to say, you can have these desires, and a way of doing that is creating a painting to show that.
I think it's such an interesting topic. If I can sort of think a little bit on that depiction, or those sorts of depictions, because I think one of the issues I grappled with in my chapter on Venus was thinking about, how do we have a language, how do we have a visual language for female sexuality that doesn't topple over into the same languages that we've had in the art historical visions that we see from Botticelli to Picasso and onwards? How do we separate that? And how, this discussion, which I think is really, I often get asked about, is how do we separate self-objectification, or the objectification of a female body, from a sexually empowering vision? So how do we allow a space for women to be sexual and to enjoy sex without them being an object of sex, so to speak? And I think that I really want to hear what you say, because I think we don't have enough women artists who are grappling with that, so that we find a way of differentiating between those two, because I don't think socially we have a way of doing that.
It's true. I just recently watched Lizzo's TED Talk. Have you seen it? About twerking. So she is talking about, I think it's called Twerking and How I Learnt to Love Myself, or something like that. And she talks about her hating her ass her whole life, and then seeing Beyonce twerk and realising that, she could own this, and that the fact that she was doing it and it made her feel good. And she's got lots of references to black women in history that have done it, and also where it originally came from, as a black African dance. And it was just brilliant, because it really is something that was empowering. It didn't feel like she was thinking about a man at all when she's twerking. It really was something that she needed to do for herself. And I thought that was excellent. I think that my painting is hopefully me trying to do the same. This particular one, Each Peach Pear Plum, is a slightly bigger woman that is on top, that's not she's I think she's empowered, and that's what I'm interested in painting. I like the abstraction as well, of doing very extreme close-ups and things, and I like that it's just unapologetically not I'm not going to apologise about my desires.
Whereas Anna, you have done something differently with the body, haven't you? If we can maybe go back to Anna's image, you have retreated from figuration of a female body. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting listening to this, actually, because I'm starting to try and revise my position. I think I just don't like to ever be pigeonholed. It's kind of like, as soon as I feel like someone's doing that, I react. And I think I always like to push up against something. So that's, I think earlier you were alluding to having an incident at the RCA. I think I'd had a little bit of press, and I was actually painting the female body at the time. I'd kind of painted through the male body, I'd painted the female gaze, and I turned the lens on myself, and I've got a series of work that actually is the female body. And I think I'd had a write-up in a magazine, and they'd called me a feisty feminist. And then I got some hate mail from someone that I was at the Royal College with, a man that was studying on the same course. And that actually had a huge effect on me, and I never really shared it. I shared it with a few actually male friends and just thought, you know, what do you think about this? But it really, I think the most important thing for me is to feel like I am in charge and I get the final say. And, you know, I was always really drawn to quite misogynist painters like Picasso, like Matisse, you know, like Gauguin. And I think it's because, you know, they could really fucking paint. You know, they could put the paint on the canvas. And for me, I wasn't kind of committed enough to the imagery of what it means to be a woman, to look like. I mean, but aside, let me just say, I think painting is sex. I mean, I think if you're a painter, you are literally in the act of intercourse. You know, that's what it's like being in the studio. You know, you are involved with this stuff, and it's physical. And so I guess I just realized that I just didn't need to depict the body to kind of, you know, suggest that the body is present, because the body is present. I am the body, and I am putting the paint on the canvas, and I can have all of my desires without being fucking criticized by some dickhead who has their opinions about what it means to be getting a tiny little bit of exposure. So yeah, it just suddenly felt like, oh, I just don't need this imagery. But I totally take what you're saying, and I think, you know, it's an interesting thing to think about. But also, you know, I just don't know what it means I don't know what female desire looks like anymore. I mean, being a painter, you're quite reclusive, and you spend a lot of time opting out of society. And for me, actually, painting is about freedom, and that's the most kind of important thing. So what it means to have female desire, I'm not even sure anymore. I don't know what it looks like.
I think it's really refreshing to hear a female artist to talk about the erotics of painting as an act and the material pleasure of it as something that's both a physical connection with your materials and whatever it is you're painting, but also something that has the erotics of a psychological connection. And I think that's a really refreshing and really empowering thing that I'm really glad you shared that. I thought that was really exciting.
I think that where Anna and I came together initially was because of colour and the juxtaposition of colour, the push and pull of colourful forms. You know, hers more abstract maybe and constructivist, but the way that colours react with each other, that does feel like sex, and the way that they can rub along nicely, or they can clash and they can shout. But they're just a way of expressing feelings and sensations and human connection. So that's what we, I think, are both doing in different ways.
And so the erotics of colour, so we're entering into like a discourse of the erotics of colour and desire from a feminine perspective. So I was struck by Linda Nochlin. She wrote a book in the mid-70s called Woman as Sex Object, and it's out of print, but you might be able to find it on eBay, which is where I found my copy. And she says that you know, female desire is a continent without a language. So this idea of this expansive territory that we have yet to find a suitable language for, that's universally recognizable. The fact that we can't assume these things without prior explanation, and that they're not immediate in the way that the artist feels them as being immediate. Which is why obviously we need more women artists, and we need more women working without the constraints of being disheartened or receiving aggressions in their places of study, and we also need the art market to, you know, to kind of wake up a little bit more, even though things are changing, but relatively slowly. I mean, the fact that we're even having panel discussions about it. I'm talking at London Art Fair next spring or January, I think. There's another panel discussion about women in the art market, but we've been having this conversation for at least 5 years, you know. Like, it feels like, why do we have to keep starting from the beginning all over again? And that's something else we talked about, is this idea that the genealogy of artists that have come before, or thinkers and writers that have come before. I don't think that's something that is adequately exposed in a way that it becomes mainstream enough for it to take root and take seat. Judy Chicago recently talked about how women artists are always starting from the beginning. We do not have the luxury of standing on one another's shoulders and inheriting a path ahead of us. You're kind of moving into the void, aren't you? I feel like that as a writer, and as someone who also came from a working class background that has no template for what did it mean for someone to be a professional creative that wasn't about, menial labour in a way. I mean, I'm doing a disservice to my parents there, but it's this kind of feeling your way into the void when you're doing something as a woman that is creative. Let's not forget that it wasn't until the 1930s that a woman was elected as a full member of the Royal Academy of Arts. It was Dame Laura Knight. In the mid-1930s, that was the first time since the 18th century where they had two founding members that they completely disregarded. I mean, this is a social problem because it's denying a space for other women to connect to, and I think that's something that I really wanted to explore.
And I just think it's getting worse because of the lack of arts education or the lack of funding for people like us that want to study art. It becomes more and more impossible as a working class person to think that this is a valid occupation. It just continues to get worse.
Can I just ask you a question? I mean, how do you think it does improve? Because we're mainly talking to a room full of women, and I just have a sneaking suspicion that misogyny is still very present. Domestic violence has gone up during COVID, and street violence has gone up against women, but there's so many more talks like this going on, and there's so much tick box. But what do you think? Do you think misogyny is getting smarter?
I think we're definitely living in a moment in which male violence against women and girls is reaching a crescendo that seems really disproportionate from how advanced we might seem to think about ourselves as a neoliberal society. I think that the rise of a certain type of feminism that's been made commercial has allowed also gaps in which women can be fed a narrative in which any choice is empowering, any kind of display of oneself is empowering. And I think that's allowed for a certain amount of male liberty to come into play. I think, there was always the discussion with this. I think it's really interesting when we think about sexual emancipation, because in the 1970s or the late 60s, when we think about the birth of the pill and women having contraception, that allowed them control over their own they allowed them reproductive autonomy, but at the same time it allowed a get-out clause for whatever kind of sexual relations to be expected without the risk of pregnancy. And so I think we're in a similar position where we have a freedom around sexuality and exploring our sexuality, but at the same time I still see a misogynistic control over that, whether that's in the pressure that is being put on young women that we hear horror stories about, and rape culture in schools, or whether it's the attacks on reproductive autonomy in numerous American states of a developed, Western democracy, or that have never been eradicated in other parts of the world where women haven't got control over their reproductive autonomy. So I think, is misogyny becoming more covert? I think it's just, I don't know if it's just finding other mechanisms and other ways to assert itself through new technological means maybe as well.
Yeah, I mean, I went out for a dinner with an old friend the other night, and he started telling me how much he liked Jordan Peterson. And I was just like, how do you combat that kind of populist male thinker? I mean, you've done it, but it's...
I've definitely got a smaller audience than Jordan Peterson, though, let's face it. Anna, do you want to tell us a bit about a bit more about your painterly language here. I haven't given you a chance to talk more about this painting because I know it was quite pivotal for you, wasn't it? It was
Yeah, I chose this one just because I think recently I'm starting to really formulate how I paint and really develop a framework. And I think it's taken me a while, and I've had to paint through a lot of, like I said, a lot of stuff to get there. But this painting was kind of there's always kind of pivotal paintings in your practice, and this was one of them. I'd actually had a show at Elephant West, and it was quite a large show, and I'd had to produce kind of 30 paintings, and it was a very difficult time for me because my dad was dying at the time. And I it was very frustrating because I developed a painting language that I thought that might have legs. And because I think this traumatic event was happening in my life simultaneously, on reflection, I just couldn't take it anywhere. So I think I've gone through a period of years where I've almost tried to just disrupt my own painting practice. I'd be getting somewhere, and then I would try and chuck in a curveball to see if I could push it further. And I was going through a moment where I was using text to kind of reclaim some imagery. Kind of, like I said, drop the body, but I couldn't feel my way towards what it was that I wanted to paint, because you always have to paint from a place that feels like it's authentic. And so I'd already shown this painting, but I then painted over it. So this image is painted over a painting that has already been shown in the gallery. Someone actually wanted to buy it, but I refused to sell it. And that shape just kind of revealed itself to me. And I think the work that I've shown with Unit Gallery came off the back of that, because I stepped back and looked at these kind of quite severe shapes and thought, I can see the word no in it. And I think at the time I was thinking about consent. I was reflecting about some things, some heavy stuff that had happened to me as a woman, and it felt right to kind of go, okay, I'm going to claim this word no, and it's got legs. So it felt like I was able to reclaim the past, which was painful, paint over it, and take it somewhere that felt more positive. And I'm very interested in the motif now, and I'm developing another motif that comes from the mask. So I'm thinking about the mask that people wear, thinking about these kind of the front-facing face that you're meant to put on when you're out in public, and I'm trying to kind of let go of that too. I think what's the popular phrase at the moment? What's everybody doing there? It's not deschooling. It's
decolonize it, not
well, you're basically
decentering.
I can't think of the word. Oof, it'll come
and while
to me.
you're thinking about colour, there was something which I can't take credit for, but I can see her at the back there. Rose told me about when she was talking about Anna's work in relation to having read my book. And she talked about the colour of consent, and I think within this series and this painting, the idea of there not having any grey areas within that context, so no is a word that stands out in colour, it's vibrant, it doesn't need...
Rose is very smart.
Big up Rose in the back.
But I'm actually very interested in grey at the moment. I think there's always a flip, because there are so many grey areas in what we're talking about, and it's I'm interested in the stuff that's hard to pin down. I'm interested in the space of not knowing a lot of the time. But I think Rose has got it head on.
Should we talk about witches and monsters? Because we probably, I don't know how much more time we have, and I know we definitely wanted to talk about that a little bit. So I have become incredibly excited by revisiting the figures of the traditional female monster, such as Medusa, who you will know if you go straight to the last chapter of my book, was actually a rape victim in mythology, but we know her as the woman whose gaze turns people to stone. So that's a sort of confirmation, if ever there was one, about the fear of women looking at things and seeing the world, and it being something that's dangerous for women to be artists and to represent the truth of what's around them and their inflections of it. And also I talk about the figure of the witch, and I don't think I gave it quite enough space, and I wish I had a chance to write that chapter again, actually. It's the one that I feel that I rushed through, and there's more and more work that I'm discovering about rethinking the genocide, which is what it effectively was, of tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands, according to some historians, of women as witches. There were also men, but people generally agree it was 80 to 90% sort of female victims. And there's a wonderful monument that I came across, which was produced in 2011, that Louise Bourgeois created a sculpture for. So hands up if anyone has heard of it, which is will make me feel better, but also highlight the fact that we don't celebrate these political works that have a comment about the persecution of women as witches. So it's in the island of Vardø in northern Scandinavia. It's either Norway or Finland. And Louise Bourgeois created this burning seat, which is really sort of viscerally literal, of a steel chair that's lit constantly for 24 hours, and there's mirrors around it, and it's in this fantastically architectural space that's on the edge of the sea, because in this particular part, it was Norway, that was the punishment, that women were given fake trials, and then if they were suspected to be witches, they were thrown into this icy Nordic sea. I also recently discovered Kiki Smith's work, which is in Paris, which is a bronze woman who's on a pyre. And I feel that we should be talking about this. We should be talking about how witches are made, how we come to occupy in our maturing years this figure of the witch as something positive and something empowering, which is not the sort of cutesy tote bag sort of witch of mainstream feminism, but something that is more potent and more meaningful.
Do you think that this is patriarchy again at work, though? Because I think that for me, as my children are growing up and I become more independent and I feel more dangerous, I feel more unpredictable, more unapologetic about desire, more independent, and I just see it as very, I know my power, and this is the point where I'm expecting to be labelled a witch, so it's I don't know how to get away from that. It just seems that at this age, this is what will happen.
Oh, I think it's something positive. Anna, what do you think?
Witches are women in total control of herself.
Like it.
I feel similarly to Helen. Actually, it's problematic, but possibly empowering. I mean, I haven't dyed my hair for years, and I'm getting grey. And I was thinking, I need to be a bit lighter. I need to kind of lighten up my face, because as an older person, you start to look a bit drawn. And, if you're going to be an artist, you've got to compete with these younger women who've got to have, sexy photos of themselves in front of their paintings. And I've got to wait until I'm 80 until I'm taken seriously. I'm in this difficult middle stage. And I was thinking, but I don't want to dye my hair, because then I've got to pay shitloads of money to sustain it, and I don't want to be a slave to capitalism either. So I'm on the fence. I don't know, because I don't know. I mean, my mother's side of the family is Ukrainian, and there's so many kind of myths and legends around the witch, the wicked witch. It's a tough one to wear, but I understand. Do you reclaim it like the N word was reclaimed in rap? Maybe you do. I don't know. I mean, it's
queer is a word of self-identification that's been.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to David Sedaris talk the other day, and he was like, "I am not queer. I am gay."
Yeah.
So I think it's one to kick about. Yeah. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of Louise Bourgeois, and she definitely owned that space, and I respect that.
So the art witch is maybe something that is, again, another stereotype that's uncomfortable to fully inhabit, because, again, it's another archetype that is being imposed as a way of commercialising or sort of defining or making age a factor of a woman's success in some sort of way, or determining how they're packaged and sold.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Trump and the Hillary thing that you write about, which is, how do you get away from that? You have to laugh at it. You have to be irreverent about it. You have to own it. But maybe you can think about it in terms of spirituality. I mean, I think I'm very drawn to spirituality and thinking about, losing the body and, being present and using my breath. And, if it's about, being in the moment and feeling like a part of the universe, and, if that's what a spell is, great. I'm really into the I Ching and thinking about, even looking at tarot, like I'm addicted to watching tarot on YouTube, making decisions through random acts. But yeah, I don't know what it looks like. Yeah.
But maybe that's as a painter. Maybe that's what we do anyway. Is randomly stick colours together, and so maybe that's how an artist deals with it. Yes, but I don't know.
Maybe that's a good point to open it up to questions from the floor. I know we're sort of running towards our time. Is now a good time? Would you like me to just open up, and if anyone has anything they'd like to ask or any comments, please do. Yes?
Yeah, I love the discussion. Thank you so much. It's a question for whoever wants to answer it. It seems slightly like we haven't mentioned the fact that sometimes women want to be engaged in activities that some of us may not agree with, for example, something like OnlyFans or porn.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to ask you the question whether or not what you think about those platforms in modern age. And it seems to me that a lot of people, my own work is about this kind of dichotomy that those things exist, but we like to pretend that they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's not politically correct, or it's not what we might like women to do. So if you comment on that, please.
I mean, I'm glad you asked that, because I think it's a really pertinent debate. The way I see it, and I've thought about it quite a lot when I was writing my Venus chapter, is that what it speaks to me is our discomfort in when women commodify their sexuality, that there seems to be an acceptance of all forms of objectification, all forms of sexual activity, as long as women aren't getting rich from it. And when I was thinking about Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's video, which I spent a lot of time writing and thinking about, especially women of colour, that seems to be, that created even more of a maelstrom of discussion and judgment. I haven't worked out my feelings on, I'm not in a position to say whether I think it's right or wrong. The overriding feeling I get is this discomfort with when women get rich out of it. I think that's what it illustrates to us. I think that it's a sort of natural response to making money. It's it's a really obvious, straightforward way to make money if you haven't got money and you want to evade a sort of capitalist labour where you're working 10 hours a day on 0 hour contract. Why wouldn't you make money by selling your body? That seems like a really obvious choice. I'm not in a position to comment on whether it's right or wrong to do that, but again, as I said, I think the material relations within it, the discomfort people have with women making money on their own from sex, is interesting. What do you guys think?
I think that it's just probably important as a woman to own your own desires and not give a shit what anybody thinks about it. And I know that you're going to come across people that don't like you having a discourse on anything sexual. I get taken down off Instagram all the time because even though it's not real flesh, it's oil paint, it's not nipples, it's just not acceptable.
But then Botticelli won't be taken down. There's going to be plenty of you know, the birth of Venus, which has nipples painted in flesh, but they're not taken down, right? So that's these double standards within Instagram, which is hugely problematic for artists, isn't it?
Again, I don't have the answers, but I just hope that if we carry on making work that carries on this discourse, then at least, you know, we're not getting pushed down, we're not getting hidden, if we keep making work like that.
Yeah, I don't have the answer either, but I feel like as long as there's a safe space for it, you know, I think you have to kind of question the other kind of factors at play, like you say, like capitalism and you know, the kind of motives behind it. You know, often, you know, if you're very traumatized in life, you're much more comfortable in a traumatic situation. You know, I think some of these things take a really long time to unpick. But yeah, I think that it should be a safe space for women and men.
I know, because the politics of sex work is quite a big thing to get into. Maybe that's something that your work is involved with, because there is a very divisive discourse within feminism itself, which suggests that sex work is not something that women naturally go into out of choice, but is something that the conditions they find themselves in, the trauma they find themselves in, is a response to it. And then there's another side that says sex work is work and should be treated with the same dignity and validation as other forms of work. So yeah, it's a really complex debate.
And it continues for years, because I mean, Cozy Fanny Tutti was making work about sex work,
Of course,
a very long time
sex,
ago.
music,
and like you say, this, you know, we keep having to reinvent and it never changes.
Yeah, we can't find any. I think it's really interesting. I thought about the recent Maggie Hambling sculpture of Mary Wollstonecraft. It's something that I thought on my way here. It's not quite related to OnlyFans, but it's the idea that we cannot find a universally satisfying or a universally acceptable way of depicting women's bodies, because you have Maggie Hambling creating Mary Wollstonecraft in a sort of drawing on a traditional bronze nude, if you like, or a Rodin expressionist type nude, where lots of people found that really objectifying, and then other people said, well, this isn't every woman, we shouldn't have these taboos about women's bodies, just seeing a pair of tits, what's the big deal? And I think that again leads back to Instagram. A pair of tits is a massive problem on Instagram.
That might be a very nice note to end on. I know Katrina from Unit, you're going to say thank you. So, Catherine, but you are sticking around for any further questions.
Yeah, very happy to answer any questions over a glass of something for those who want to.
Just to say thank you to you, all three of you. It was an incredibly stimulating talk, and I know I'll be thinking about it in years to come, and I hope you all will be too. Thank you to Awita for partnering up with us on this amazing evening. And please do have a browse of our current show, the themes of which are very connected to many of the topics that we spoke about this evening. Thank you.